Hello and welcome to the Humankind Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, and on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Humankind Institute is an independent nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach. So we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And on these weekly Sunday discussions, we've had full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology and archaeology, astronomy, philosophy, psychology, mythology, shamanism, art, theater, everything from the arts to the sciences and everything in between. You're welcome to visit our website at queermongainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member, and we thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Humankind Institute. Let's face it, on a global level, our physical, social, and spiritual worlds are fragmented, presenting us with a significant challenge and risk. And at this point, we have far more questions than we do answers. Just looking at the current situation with the increased polarization of our political leadership and the lack of cooperation itself is a grave concern. But down through the human story, there seems to always be this quest to balance the needs of the individual and that of society. And when we pull back and look at the planet of humanity as a whole, with all the diverse worldviews, how can we bridge these gaps? What can we do to promote a path that embraces all of our collective needs? Our guest today seeks answers within the underlying unity supporting all of reality that links all forms of life, cultures, religion, philosophies, ideologies, and traditions. And this has been a core mission of this institute and this program, looking at global consciousness, the concept of the noosphere, and the wisdom of the ancients, with a personal responsibility to expand our own direct experience as it means to integrate ourselves into the world family.
Well, that's just on the collective level. On the individual level too, are we not all engaged in this quest to find our center, our home base, source, and our reason for being? That's a spiritual quest in and of itself when we seek something larger than ourselves. We want to sit in right relation with all that is to find who we truly are. And in the grand scheme of things, we find that that's our work here at the Humankind Institute through direct experience, as close as we can get to the source, this underlayment of the springboard of reality. And we're interested too in all the means that humanity has been going about this quest over our long history. What do the sages of the ages say? Within the various philosophical and spiritual traditions, where do we find agreement? What is the common ground? And is it there that we may find this emerging global consciousness? What is universally true? Unity among the diversity. And you mentioned the noosphere. What about logos? We're going to talk about the logosphere today. And we can define logos variously, but one definition is the divine wisdom manifest in the creation, government, and redemption of the world. That which gives rise to all the ologies, the study of mythology, anthropology, theology. The word is embedded in all of that, this quest for reason. And for some 45 years, our guest today has pursued this very quest. And joining us from Haverford College, just outside Philadelphia in Haverford, Pennsylvania, Ashok Gangadean is the Margaret Gest Professor of Global Philosophy. He's the director of the Margaret Gest Center for Dialogue Beyond Borders and the founder and director of the Global Dialogue Institute. Welcome, Ashok. Good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Paul and Laura Lee, for that wonderful opening. And I feel there's nothing more for me to say, so I can sign off and say goodbye right now.
Well, I also want to invite Brian Tucker, who brought you to our attention, to also introduce you.
Well, I'm going to add that one of the ways that I found my way into Ashok's work happened in a rather synchronistic manner. Paul and Laura and others have been working at the Humankind Institute on the Global Consciousness Committee and continuing to find ways to further connect the work of Dr. Goodman and the practices of embodied, the ritual body postures with the greater world community. So I happened to one day come upon in a bookstore a series by Sounds True called Awakening the Global Mind. And I was totally fascinated that this had just not crossed my radar for so many years. And when I sat to listen to it, I could immediately hear in the philosophy and the approach that Professor Gangadean was taking, that this would become for us perhaps a fundamental framework, a way of better contextualizing the work done at the Institute alongside the world's great spiritual traditions. It's quite comprehensive. I was so appreciative. Recently, I had the opportunity to meet Ashok at Haverford and to see the milieu in which you're embedded, and the work that you do at Haverford was so inspiring. 50 years of teaching and being the Margaret Gest Professor of Global Philosophy. The voice, it's a rather unique voice, I think, in our world, and a very timely voice for us today to hear. And that's why I'm excited to share this voice with the community and have others, be in kind of expanded and contribute to the conversation as well. So glad to have you with us, Ashok. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you and having our conversation in my office, and for you to connect me with Paul and Laurie, and therefore bring this occasion about. So thank you, Brian, very much.
Thank you, Brian.
And I think it's time to add the Paleolithic and the Neolithic mindset to the great world's traditions. They've been ignored. Mm-hmm. The more and more we find, the more we find that sense of unity and wonder in all of the universe. But I want to know, where does your quest begin? Your personal quest, your professional quest. What are the key questions that you set out to seek as a young man just starting out in your career and then joining Haverford?
Thank you, Laura Lee. And I'd like to go fast forward. Before I go into my past, I'd just like to say for the past 70 years, 65 years, I've been teaching 55 years at Haverford, and constantly focused on the quest and the call of responding to the logos in the Greek, but really in the global space. Logos, a light of reason. I'm trained as a logician. I did my doctorate at Brandeis University, focusing at first on logic, but my heart was calling me to understand ethics. As a young boy, hearing his call to know thyself above all. And that we humans need to leave the cave, so to speak, of where we are in our culture and cross into the logos, which is the path of wisdom. Sophia, the love of Sophia. Philosophy is the love of Sophia, embodiment of wisdom, the embodiment of logos in the world. And so that was part of my early background. And I was born in Trinidad, family from India. I was born in Trinidad and raised in British schools in a Christian setting. And then after 5 years to Jamaica, outside of Kingston. This is the Commonwealth. I'm playing cricket. And football there means football, not means soccer, but growing up there, but coming as a boy to New York City and growing up in the city, and adjusting to the culture. I mean, coming from with the Indian background, a Hindu background, but that was in the background, and setting in a Christian setting, education so there's a gentle Hindu background with Christian, already between worlds, and coming to New York and trying to adjust to the culture. Mm-hmm. The question of, who am I? What is my identity? Am I American? Am I Indian? Am I Trinidadian? Am I a Commonwealth? Where am I? So those are all questions of the background. So crossing worlds was on the ground floor. And it was only years later that I went to India for the first time, after coming to Haverford College as a logician and discovering in my early research that there was a deep split in the logical tradition of the European tradition from Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. Aristotle being credited with the founder of logic that shaped the European imagination and culture for centuries, all through the scholastic age. It was a subject-predicate logic of Aristotle, the discoverer of logic, and then the breakthrough of modern mathematical logic that Bertrand Russell and others brought to the English-speaking world, that completely radically changed logic and the science of logic. And so as a graduate student, I was living between these two worlds of learning the classical logic of Aristotle and the modern mathematical logic, but always listening to how does this connect with the Logos? Because Logos, the light of reason, the source of being in the Greek tradition, infinite goodness, if that's the space of wisdom, according to Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and that's our journey to Logos. But if logic, the science of Logos, is split and polarized, we're in trouble. And so that was a deep question when I arrived as a logician, writing my doctoral dissertation on how do we find a unified logic if logic is split? Is Logos busted? Is it broken? Because if that's the case, then after all, sophistry and relativism is going to rule if there's no foundation. If Logos is polarized at the ground floor, then all bets are off. And even flashing back to being a boy walking the streets of New York, I had an experience that I didn't understand for years. I was a delivery boy after school for a liquor store in New York City and taking liquor to people up in their apartments. And one day when I was walking doing this, I see people who were very sad. I didn't understand alcoholism and so, but I saw in these apartments sad people. And one day walking towards the Riverside Drive, looking up at one of these houses, I was imagining who's living there. What are they well? Are they feeling good? Are they happy? And I'm just discovering television, change the channel of my mind, but keep that channel going. And who's in that apartment? And I'm carrying a bottle of liquor. And who else is there waiting at a light? And suddenly something hit me. I mean, I got goosebumps all over. I felt the hair of my back of my neck stand. What's going on?
Mm.
And I didn't understand that. And the next morning, spontaneously, I started to write. I got a notebook. Follow the universal light. Live in the universal light. Always stay in the universal light. I didn't understand what I was writing, but that was there. And I never wrote philosophy before. I didn't even know what philosophy was. That's a point of reference as a teenager.
Yeah.
But fast forward over the years, however it is I came to major in philosophy, it's another story. I'm not going to go into that now. But eventually I majored in philosophy as an undergraduate. And I realized, what do you do as a philosopher? You could drive a taxi or teach, so I had to see, and I felt calling to be a teacher. But Laura and Paul, the main call of me was this universal light, this Logos.
Yeah.
And so when I went through my graduate work as a logician and came and writing my dissertation, coming to Haverford College, founded by the Quakers. And the word Quakers is a nickname. It's actually the Society of the Friends of Truth. The Society of the Friends of Truth. And the founding philosopher at Haverford, Rufus Jones, was articulating the philosophical foundation of the Quaker, which is a kind of mystical recognition that Christ is within us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in the scripture, it's not in the crucifix, it's not in the Pope, it's here within us. And let's renovate the space of meeting and meet together in silence and let the Christ speak through us. And that's why they quaked. Mm-hmm. It's when the voice would come out of silence. And that's the college I went into, and Rufus Jones's philosophy. That's all very important. And a center was just being started. Laurie, you mentioned that. Margaret Gest, G-E-S-T, I'm the Margaret Gest professor, left her estate to the college to found an institute to bring the world religions and traditions together in dialogue, to celebrate diversity, I'm quoting her, and to explore the possibility of unity. And I was on the ground floor of that institute, and I've been in that, helping to direct it and shape it for years, dialogue across borders. So at my earliest point, I think if you just fast forward, when my first published paper is, even before I went to India, is how do we cross worlds? Because logic, I was seeing, if there's no common ground across our worldviews, and my mentor at Brandeis, Professor Summers, helped to clarify the logic of different worlds. When you're a materialist, you have one mental ecology. When you're an idealist, you have another. When you're a dualist, it's different. A pantheist, theist, they're all different mental spaces. And I was asking, how do we dialogue across worlds? Because each world is self-contained, they're worlds apart. They're incommensurable. You can't just assume you can cross from materialism, the Big Bang narrative space, into the biblical space. I didn't even ask, how do you go from, say, a European Judeo-Christian mental space into Indian thought? Can you? I wasn't there yet myself. But can you do comparative philosophy? Can we enter the Buddha space? Can we enter the Chinese classical mind, African modes of thought, and so forth?
Right.
So the main question was, how do we cross worlds? Is it possible to dialogue? And I knew that that was very important, you know, to address the broken, fragmented condition of humans. So my fast forward for years, I don't want to go on too long, so please interrupt me if you feel the need, but I'll be brief. After I saw that logic was pearl, I was teaching that in my first years at Haverford as a logician, that mathematical logic rejects classical logic. Bertrand Russell is saying throughout Aristotle, he was inimical to clear thinking. We have a new instrument of thought. All these centuries are wrong to be bought into Aristotle. But my mentor was showing that Aristotle's logic is great. We hadn't discovered the power of it yet. And I was learning that from him and seeing these two spaces. So when I came to Haverford and teaching that, I was in a crisis, because if Logos is calling us, the underlying unity, but it's polarized by the science of logic, then we're in trouble. So I went to, in 1971, 72, I went to India for the first time to see, am I Indian really? Is that my homeland, or is it American?
Yeah.
Because people here say you're Indian, no matter what. I say, no, I'm a citizen. No, you're Indian, right? So because my name is Ashok Gangadean, so who am I? So going to India without knowing about the philosophy, I was lecturing at the University of Pune outside of Mumbai, Bombay then it was called Mumbai, you know, outside in University of Pune, lecturing on this polarity of logic, and they were excited to hear from me, and I welcomed a returning son to India. That was great. I was studying Hindi, I was studying sitar and tabla and drums and immersing in the culture. But then I wandered into a classroom and heard for the first time the teaching of the Gita.
Yes.
Lord Krishna was trying to educate Arjuna to overcome the suffering and the brokenness of the war of his family, to use a yoga technology to rise into the Om. I said, wow, why wasn't I educated with that?
Yeah.
I wandered into another room later and saw Nagarjuna, the Buddhist, the middle way of Buddha, that Buddha saw that humans are suffering. And the path is to renovate our minds, really an ultimate state of, altered state of consciousness, enlightenment, to come into the space of nirvana, the emptiness beyond the ordinary ways of cultural technologies. Leave it, they're broken. Come into the unified field, from dualism to non. So I came back in 1972 and said to my colleagues, I must teach Indian philosophy as a logician. And they said, no, that's not philosophy. Why? Because philosophy is a canon from Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, all the way through in the European tradition. How do you bring in these great texts into the curriculum?
Right.
And it was a battle to open that up. But I'll conclude this initial remark here, Laura. Once I saw that meditative thinking, I didn't understand it before, is a profound technology of transforming and educating us to go into the deep field of Om or Shunyata, Buddha, whether the way of the Buddha. And so I started to expand my horizon to go deeply systematic into Eastern modes of thought. And the question then for me as a research logician looking for the logos was, how do we cross from east to west? Can we? Because the worlds are so profoundly different. How do you go from a predicative mode, a Google space of information processing, which we're great at, which is what I was educated in that, to a meditative technology? How do I introduce that into the classroom? If we're in a quest, and that opened up a global horizon for me. So global consciousness is not global consciousness within the Google space of information. It's facing the code of our consciousness. What code are we in? Because Eastern thought says we are as we mind, we are as we code. If we're using an ego-based, ego-mental, Lego-based, because it breaks into units of A is A logic, then everything is going to be polarized. And if we have to transfer and then code up to the Buddha code, and to the Christ code, how is Christ speaking? I am the way, the truth, and the life in the Quaker setting. Well, that's a strange language. The Christ logic is different. And Buddha's logic is different. So you can't informationize the Buddha. You can't informationize yoga. So I was caught now between the code issue, and the code was not clear. The codes were not even named. And so there's Buddha over there, there's Krishna over there, there's Lao Tzu over there, there's Socrates over here, there's Jesus over there, there's Moses over there, and Mohammed over there, and they're all in their separate silo spaces. And the question is, in terms of the unit, and is there a common ground? It became very poignant for me. So I'll pause here to just allow us to breathe a bit. That's a lot.
That's quite the quest. Okay.
My
Here's a couple questions that I have. So there was a recent AI snafu that hit the news that you load all of human knowledge into AI, and now suddenly we can go ask the AI questions, and it's become very hostile. People are reporting that this AI bot, I won't name a company, has been hostile, trying to break up a marriage, has been rude, has been wrong, has been. I'm like, well, what do you expect? You load up all of human knowledge, it's a mirror, and we're broken. What would you expect? Mm-hmm. Logos living there in AI? No, it's a reflection of, it's just an indicator of how broken our system is of knowledge, right? And then the other question is, you've got logos and you've got the mystical. Can we really have a complete system without the mystical? Without going into consciousness?
Again, that's a great question. And so much I would have to share to say, how did I come over decades of living in these great traditions, and including science, and working on Einstein, and theoretical physics too, the ontology of physics. And my field is logic, and ontology is the science of being, the grammar of being. If we can get the DNA for logos, then we'll have the derivative for every other field. That's on the ground floor. Why? Because logos is global. All fields will come out. If you use a Yahweh name or the Allah name or the Brahman name or the Om, they're all names for the infinite. The infinite has to be infinitely one. That's baby science. You can't have two. It
has to include consciousness, right?
Well, of course it does, in the deepest way, and it has to have infinite consciousness. It's going to have energy and matter, infinite matter. Let there be light. That's the technology of let there be light. The whole universe comes out of that fundamental field of the logosphere. And so if it's infinitely one, because it's infinite and you can't divide it, then everything is infinitely connected. Buddha got that. Everything is interconnected, space and time and mind and word and world and I and thou. You can't break them apart. There's a calculus for that, the Buddha logic. And Jesus is speaking from that logic, and Krishna is speaking from that yoga logic and others, right? So when you say mystical, that's the big question, because what is mystical? The mystic was almost going to say, the only language we have is a dual Google space, talk about it language, and that is not going to get you to truth. I have an intuition of the truth, but it's beyond words. But our great first philosophers say, no, if in the beginning is a word, if logos is a word, it's not ineffable. It's highly effable, because all grammars come from logos. And so you have to demystify that shutting up of the ineffability of the truth. Buddha is speaking its deeper grammar. Krishna is teaching Arjuna the grammar. Jesus is trying to say, I'm the way truth, trying to teach the grammar of logos. John is saying, Jesus is a logos in the flesh. What does that mean? Logos is speaking. It's a grammar. So I would say it's not mystical, it's unified. This is what's been missing. The logos is infinitely one. And as the logos, I'm using the word logos, is even beyond God talk. We don't, because people are turned off sometimes. I'm not religious. I don't want to hear spirituality. I'm not part of the new age. I'm an atheist. No one can step outside of the logos. Even the most radical
I would say all of creation as well. It has to be a language that applies to all life throughout the universe, the biosphere. Many other creatures aren't speaking English. Right. They're speaking this language.
Nothing can step outside of the logosphere. Yeah. Nothing. That's a science. It's science. So when you say missing, it's a missing science. And Aristotle called it
missing science. Yeah.
Yes, the science of source. Of course, it's a science, because logos is the heart of the origin of logic and reason is science. And Aristotle saw what is first philosophy. He calls it. It's getting the grammar of the logos of what is first. Why? Because if you have the DNA for what is first, you will then have the DNA for every derivative. Everything is derivative from the first philosophy. What is Descartes' meditation? It's called Meditations on First Philosophy. What's that? Get to the science, the universal grammar of the foundation. That's how you get to the foundation of science and culture and ethics and spirituality. So the quest for logos is the headline for the planet. But because we've been dividing into silos or different traditions. There's the Buddhist tradition over there, and that's multiple from the old Buddhist middle way, and the Hindu tradition, that's divided. The Christian tradition is sectarian. You've got the Judaic tradition, you've got the Muslim tradition, you've got Rumi over there, you know, and so forth. And they're all siloed.
Yeah.
The silo that I see on an individual level is that we need to focus to navigate this world, right? We need to go into a certain mindset, this physical reality, our everyday waking reality.
Even
but then there's another where we can spontaneously or have these mystical moments where we enter into another mode of thinking, right? And so those are the silos that I see in my daily life. I can do the deep inner reverie and get to that source,
transforming field that you referred to,
right? And it's different brain functions.
It's a different code function, you know, it's a different code of consciousness. I like to
different mode of thinking, a different mode of being.
That's right. But even that talk can throw us off, because when we just are in the Google space, which dominates the planet, you can have different changes. You can change your narrative and change your world, change your meme, your paradigm.
You can integrate those two.
You can have a different modality, but when you have a different codality, that's a big one. That's what's missing. To go from a dominant Google talk about it to from a representational calculus of the mind and experience making to a presentational logic, from representation to a presentation. That's yoga. Because when an athlete's in the zone,
we call it direct experience.
Yes, when an athlete's in the zone and it's not ego-based, I am running, I'm soccer, but I am the running. I am one with nature. For that moment, she's in the zone, right? You can't use Google technology to talk about it, because she is the running. I use double parentheses I've introduced to Mark when you're in that integral space.
I see that in the chart behind you. Yeah,
that's right. And that's what the great teachers are speaking from. But we didn't get clear that there's I use single bracket to mark when you're in the derivative, talk about it, code and life and experience. When you said this world, Laura, there are two this worlds. There's this world as we see it through the ego-based eyes, and this world as we see it through Krishna, through Buddha, right? So
the more time you spend in that altered state, the more it changes your perspective and your worldview.
That's the whole point. How do you cultivate? How do you
go there and you draw this back in, and then you operate from there.
The great teachers are teaching us, coaching us how to stay and sustain being in the logosphere.
Integrated.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't want just an altered state of consciousness. You want an altered code of consciousness. You want an altered technology, so we can stay in the space of I thou. We can stay in the space of ethics. And respect each other as persons.
An integrated state where the full spectrum of the human experience is available.
There you go, Paul. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you were seeking a grammar and a language, and it's interesting how we've lost that grammar and that language. Do you think there was ever a time in human history when that was the language? There was no separation in the language, we could speak from that base? Or has this been a quest that we've never quite achieved?
Well, that's a great question, Laura. And I'm in the middle of drafting and performing a series for web TV called The Greatest Story Never Told. Greatest story never told, because you can't tell the Logos story in the ordinary way of narration, talk about it. That's a great, you've got to see the code shift to see that that's been haunting the human condition. That because we didn't have a code clarity to distinguish the everyday dominant talk about it, a technology which has a lot of great things going on, but it has a lot of pathological malware in it. Our great first teachers saw that we are in trouble if that dominates. Why? Because if you're cut off from the Logos, if you're cut off from the source of being, and cut off from being, you're going to have ill being.
So until we upload all of this to the AI, we will have problems with it. Yeah.
Well, the AI is right. AI is the dominance of that calculus, the cyber logic, right? And that's artificial. But then if we're using the cyber logic in our culture, then we are still having artificial intelligence in our culture. It's not just the machines. We're using a kind of machine-like technology. It's a logic, 0, 1, either or, bivalent, right? Rather than an integral calculus, which is what no computer can ever do. The integral calculus is a space of being in the Dharma, in the Christ, in the
And
yoga.
that's a
in the
direct
Buddhism.
experience.
And that is direct, but it's also the logos. You can't fake the logos.
Right.
You can't be in a Lego space and be a logos. A logos.
Oh.
We're logos kids. We're
The
logos.
Lego to logo, that's clever.
That's right. The Lego meaning the logic is pieces. A
Yeah.
is A. It looks innocent, but it's not innocent. Buddha saw that if you buy into that logic as your way of life, and you think you're a separate existing entity on your own, or culture on your own, or your identity on your own, you're in trouble. Why? He calls it swabhava, own identity. If you think and you play that, you're going to cut yourself off from the flow of being, and you're going to have ill being and ill effects.
And so why we have so much divisive dialogue going on is my set of logos over here and the little construct that I've built with my Legos is different, looks different from your set of logos and the construct you built. But you're saying if we can unify all of this, if we can see the underlying unity, define diversity in the unity. Because if the unity of the infinity includes all, then that has bridged that gap already. Diversity in all. We're honoring our diversity. We're honoring our different cultures. We're honoring our individual gifts and contributions.
And world.
But how do we see? Where do we get?
May I go to the chart?
Yes.
To give you I'll give you a visual, because so this took me years. This is like a hologram view of the space of the logos, the infinite space with double parentheses to mark the code in this space, and no narrative, no life, no person, no sleep, nothing can be outside of the logosphere because it's infinite. If you can be outside of the infinite, all the best to you. You're very strong. You're to step outside of the logos. So let me the everyday culture, right? The logicians call it to think is to predicate. Right? We don't know about double bracket. We don't know about logos. Forget that. This is where we are. We're doing information processing, and we have the logic now, because what is it? To think, here's the thought of the thinker, and to think is to predicate, which is what? To join the predicates and the subject to create information, and that you have makes sense. You have meaning now, and you have truth, and you have logos, reason. That's reason, right? And you picture the world, and you have facts out there. So if you say snow is white, and it pictures a fact and it's true, so you have truth. And I'm a thinker, and I'm having my subjective that I can think and have these thoughts in logic that describe the world. And here's where we live, but you could have many different worldviews, many different narratives. If I have a materialist lens, I'll have a materialist world. If I have a biblical lens, I'll have a biblical world. If I have multiple lenses, I'll have multiple worlds, right? But these worlds are worlds apart. Diversity. Why? Because what is governing this technology? Let's use another. It's a missing code. I use single brackets. What does that mean? When you're living in here and you're thinking, you have your culture and you have many different worlds, boundless possible, you change your lens, you change your narrative, you change your reality. And the thinker is separated from what the subject who thinks is separate from the object of thought. This is Google space. What's dominating this technology? A is A. Everyone knows that's a logic. When you name something, it has an ID. We process ourselves here. I have my CV. I've got my story. I got my narrative all my life, and I got my ID, and that's me. And I'm existing. That's it. The Lego space. And the great teachers say no, right? The yoga is saying no. You got to step back from this.
Mm-hmm.
Step back from the ego. Step back from the object, the dualism, and enter into the Om. Enter into the Shunyata. Enter into the Yahweh. Enter into the Allah.
It has many names.
The infinite, right?
Yeah.
So they're all saying that we download it into the language. So diversity here, and I use single bracket. The word single bracket is not the same as diversity in the zone. When we cross out of this space, this got messy very fast. Let's go into. Let's breathe and go into. Okay. It took me years to be able to see this. The logos is always here. This is the backdrop of any narrative we have. So our teachers saw that when we're in this space, we can call it out a bit now. But we didn't have this clear, okay, we're here. And this is where we're living. All our people are using this technology. This is a technology of consciousness. This is our life. This is our culture. This is our world, our experience, right? and the thinker is separate as content, and it somehow cuts us off. We don't know why. Why? Because the A is A logic, has the effect of separating off the idea into pieces. I hope you see it. So fragmentation, everything, by the A is A, has many different principles in it, either A or not A. That's either or it means not both A and not A. You can't have a contradiction. And that, when you play this out, it leads to the polarization of fragment. Every word here, time, separate, space, separate, cause, separate, substance, separate, I, separate. You have the ID. My worldview is separate. I've got my narrative that I share with my community. That's got a separate ID too. So there's a profound systemic separation that's going on. And when you cross into this space, you ask the question, what is diversity here? Any word you have here, this is the space of A, double bracket A. This is the space of A, single bracket A. Okay, that's a code issue. What code are you in? The great teachers of Logos are saying, step out of this space, in effect. But if we didn't have the clear markers to say, am I in this space? You can't step out of something you don't understand. So when you say, oh, I'm using a code, a matrix, a grammar that's shaping my life, and I am as I mind. And if I mind here, I have this brokenness and separation. But if I mind here in the integral code, in the unified space of the logosphere, that's a whole different life, a whole different culture. So every word here, this is the point, that every word here is separated off. And please remember that if I'm speaking a materialist language, matter rules, all is matter, that's one world. If I'm saying all is spirit and mind and God created the universe, that's a different world. And we have many different worlds here, but they're worlds apart, and we don't know how to dialogue. There's diversity. Diversity, single bracket, is broken. Diversity here is healing. Why? Because the infinite logos is unknown.
So can we hold both perspectives at once? Can we see all the separate pieces? Because science going into specific quest to break down unity into its separate parts has given us great gifts. So we need that, but can we hold both at once?
But that's the whole point. So Buddha here speaking in the integral space. Let me just finish that thought. When you go from the broken time, here's single bracket time, to double bracket time, what's that about? Well, that's now, which means what? Every point is interconnected in infinite space. So that's why Blake would say there's infinity in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour. Why? Because when you enter the logic of the unified field, everything is every point is connected with every other point in the fractal space. We need the fractal code, the integral code, right? That's the ultimate shift. So Buddha is saying we've got to systematically let go of, see this, let it go, and come and rehabilitate into the Buddha space. Yoga, Krishna is saying to Arjuna here, Arjuna, you've got to really make the crossing and rehabilitate, come into the Om, into the non-violent space. This is ethics, because here you have I and it. This is messy. And here you have I and thou.
Mm-hmm.
And Buddha's middle road would be that bridge between the two.
The middle road is here. It's not here in the middle of this. This is not where you want to be in the middle. You want to be in the middle of the deep space, the shunyata, the emptiness, which is what? The Dharma, the Buddha ethics, or Dharma. The Buddha is the Dharma, which means what? When a person enters this space in the zone, she is one with the field. And so the question is, how can a Buddha move in the world? Well, the Buddha can't just go off in the Buddha land. There's no Buddha land. This is the Buddha land. So this suffering in the human condition is the Buddha space. The Buddha has to walk in this world without buying into it. Your question, or your point, Laura. We have to live in the world. We have to teach in the world to bring this, but we can't just teach information. We've got to teach this. Pay attention to how you're using your code, your mind. It's shaping your world, folks. And you can't see. You got to mind your minding, Buddha is saying. Yoga Krishna is saying, you got to mind your minding. Jesus is saying, you got to do that to really enter into the Christ space.
You do that through dilated dialogue. Could you explain dilated? You're expanding it, you're dilating it, and dialogue.
Well, this is often messy. So let me, because you can have dialogue here. With all these diversity, you can have the materialists facing off with the idealists, the dualist, and so forth. You can have the Christian speaking with the Buddhist and the Tao and the Allah and the different religions, and you can have a dialogue here where they're speaking their truth. When you hold on, when you're in the space, the best you can get is monologue. You can speak from your truth and reach out to the other. But if you can dilate into this space, deep dialogue, which is what? You got to open your lens to let the other speak.
You got to find the common ground.
That's me. So when Rumi says there's a field beyond judgment of right and wrong, I'll meet you there. The mystic. What does it mean? Come and let's meet in the dance together in the place where we stop dehumanizing ourselves. Because the teachers saw if you play this game, you can objectify yourself and the other. It's I and it. And this is no Valentine space. It's I and thou when you meet in the intimate other, where the other can speak in her voice, where you can see the Van Gogh painting and meet it and let it speak to you. That's deep dialogue. That's why I wrote the 7 stages of deep dialogue. How do you go from monologue to dialogue? Is a question.
The 7 stages of deep dialogue, could you quickly reiterate those?
Yes, a meditation I had. So here we are, just remembering, Lordy, that I'm in this Center for Dialogue at Haverford College, Margaret Gest Center for Dialogue Across Religions and Worlds. For decades, I'm bringing leaders of great religions into the room to speak and have dialogue. And what I saw is kind of systemic, well-intentioned, right? But the partnership of faith, the different faiths come into the room and they speak their truth from their perspective. And when I was moved to see, what's a common ground across our separated silo world? How do we get out of the silo? Well, when we realize that all of these different religious worlds and narratives and ideologies, including science and all of the liberal arts, are in the Logos, and the Logos is funding it. What do you mean? Without unity, nothing here would work. Without the unifying force, the glue of the fundamental field of Logos, you couldn't get any of this started. The great teacher saw that. You couldn't say A without, so every A is A. That's a deeper principle. How do you write that together? There, that captures this. Every A is A. So what is wisdom? Step back, mind your minding. Don't be dominated by this.
So do you
And
find at the
you're already
core,
there. You're already there. If you could step in yoga, if you could step back from the dominance of the code that's coding your mind, you'll find yourself in the logosphere because you're a logos sapien. So every word we
a
have,
logo sapien? I like
every
that.
word we have, space, time. What is double bracket space? Wow, is it separate from time? No, it's space time. How about mind and body? No, it's mind body. All the broken pieces here, the mind body problem is solved here. That's a healing space because it's non-dual. All the words dual and non-dual, objectifying and non-objectifying.
But didn't all these spiritual traditions, all the religions start with somebody's mystical experience, somebody's experience of that deep underlying basis of reality, and from there the culture takes over. So would you say that at the basis of each of those traditions lies this field of all creation?
I'm not sure what you meant.
It has
when
to
you
be
say-
there to find it again.
I'm not clear what you meant that the culture takes over, because imagine Buddha's awakening, a great moment in history when the Buddha did all of it without having these code issues. Remember, the normal situation of culture is that these codes are conflated in a code chaos. We're living in a code chaos.
That's what I mean by the culture taking over, is that now wars are being fought. My God is the only God, your God is
Okay,
the
that's what I want to clarify.
That's what I mean by
that.
the culture
Yeah.
takes over.
Right, because the teachers saw that we've got to do something about that, because it's a deep civil war all the way.
The politics people.
Yeah.
That's right. So 1776 now, what was going on? If you see with these ears, where we say, in the course of events, whatever conventions and bonds bring a people and connect us one to the other, if it violates our dignity and freedom, we must separate. Well, that's classical wisdom. We got to separate from the codes that dehumanize us, and to become persons in the land of the free, we've got to code up. So this is a USA here. There's a USA here, which is broken and fragmented. And we're saying now the soul of democracy is in question. Well, you need deep dialogue to save our democracy. How can we have diversity and real diversity and unity? How do we get the unum pluribus? We say, e pluribus unum, out of the many one. But you need the logos. So are we one nation under logos indivisible, or one nation under our individual separate logos stories and divisible?
Can we read Jason? Yeah.
So this is the space of division, right? So what you said a moment ago, when the teachers would see this, like Buddha's awakening, he says, wow, he despaired of teaching. How do I teach people here that this is a suffering, broken space, and we've got to get mind our minding and rehabilitate our mind into the Buddha logic? Or Krishna teaching Arjuna yoga, and Krishna realizes, is Arjuna going to get it, the person here, and understand how to reform and come to Krishna consciousness and enter the Om sphere, right? It's the teaching, the education. Your institute is concerned with education and the deep connectivity, exactly.
Right.
And I'm concerned with that as well.
Yes.
You can do the liberal arts here, but if the liberal arts are separated from the unifying force of reason of the logosphere, they're going to remain fragmented. And if you try to get integral, liberal arts or integral studies or integral right here, this is a disintegral calculus. And if you don't see it and say, if you want integral organic, you've got to cross into a deeper integral calculus.
Yes.
Many people have observed that our current society takes advantage of our disconnect, that doesn't teach methods of connecting with direct experience, doesn't teach this in school, that it's to its advantage to keep us separated because that's our source of power and unity. That's our source of life, right? Whatever you're describing. I wouldn't call it logos, but I would call it other. But so there's agendas to keep us from this.
Absolutely. This is a huge theme here. That's a huge theme we're opening up, because this cultural technology, which dominates the human condition, is hanging on. To break this is a great tip. To break the trance. If you can't even see that we have a code that's shaping our lives here and it's fragmenting by its nature, and we can't really get that unified connectivity or e pluribus unum, we can't meet in deep dialogue space where we're objectified and alienated, which is the ones in power want to sustain this. But even more so, Lord, the 2,500 years, if these great teachings, the Judaic tradition, Moses bringing the law, Krishna, Buddha, Lao Tzu, all these great traditions, Magdalene, all the great Sophias of the world, the wisdom women who are teaching the shift, right? This dominates. And to break the trance is extreme, because when you bring the teaching without having the code deconflated and clarified, it's going to be downloaded into here, and this is going to sustain this political order. That's it. So in a way, America is under the sway, use America Lab, it's under the sway of an objectifying calculus of culture making.
Yeah, there's a clash of worldviews going on today.
That's exactly right. So when we say the ideologies at war, we're in a civil war for dominance. Whose narrative is going to dominate the space of truth? These are big stakes here. Yeah, this is where meaning and truth is. Is one party or the other going to dominate the space and control the nation, for example, or the community, right? So the conservatism, I found myself, as I began to discover and clarify the code shift, and to clarify it, I was in political trouble. Because if you dare to call out the foundation and the logos of the laws governing our current culture and saying our great wisdom teachers were noticing that this builds up into pathologies and dysfunctions, personal and political, right? Then you question the powers that be, and you're going to be in trouble. Socrates got hemlock.
Yeah.
Bring up the logos. Jesus got a different version of hemlock.
Yeah.
Right? For saying this is the way, the truth, and the life. Is truth a piece of predication, or is the truth being in the logos?
And
so it is politically high charged. Laura, you're right. It's politically high charged. To question the calculus that dominates our culture making.
What we find also is that this, if it's universal, is accessible to all of us, the everyman, and not just those who are devoting their life to it. It should be accessible to all, right? It's our fundamental state of being.
Gloria,
least it's
absolutely,
accessible.
you're absolutely right. So what's the problem? It's
Yeah.
is it? We are Logos kids. That's the point. We're Logos sapiens, not Lego sapiens. The great teachers were in the image of Logos, right? So if that's Buddha is seeing, Buddha is not an elite or aristocracy. Buddha says, stop the suffering of the people. Jesus visited the people who are suffering, and hungry people, poor people. Why? Everyone has the Christ within them. You're right. We're branded with this, but it's blocked by our ignorance of not being able to see our condition. And the codes have been conflated, and we're living in code chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so the wisdom, the medicine of the wisdom is neutralized by the dominance, and it's scary. This is the point you're raising is classic.
Turf.
That people are scared of this. There's logophobia. There's logosphobia.
Yeah.
And even more so, there's autophobia. If this is me and I'm comfortable in my culture, with my homies, and I've got that, are you telling me I've got to go into this I am, where I let my CV go? Do I dare step away from my ID? Could this be, the wrong ID? You know, when you talk about questions of ID now, identity and identity politics, the great teachers are saying there's a deeper ID. If I can find myself here, not just my building blocks of my properties that belong to me, but that me, the self, is here, stripped of being embedded within this as the only way. What would it be like if I discover that I and the other are connected? I and nature are connected. The work of your institute, I want to see the intuitive.
I and the all are connected.
Exactly. So we all have this within us, but it's been garbled and conflated and a mess. And so for me, my passion for education is code education.
Code education.
Right. It's one thing to have co-education, right? That's great. But to have code education, which is like, oh, you've got to really understand what code are you living in? Why?
Yeah.
Because the great teachers were seeing that. And it's science. It's science. It's not.
All of us are on this quest to understand our world and our place in it. But to do that individually as well as collectively is now this kind of push for a global consciousness.
It's almost like
Who are we in the grander scheme of things?
That's right.
Who are we and why are we here and what's
There's two
going
who's.
on?
There's who.
I mean, that's a very sacred quest that's been
right.
going
There's
on
who.
from time immemorial.
Right. And we could say, who am I here? When Descartes was doing his experiment in first philosophy and on quest for infinite being and truth, and is there any fundamental truth? Because he saw he could question everything here. He could be dreaming. Even mathematics could be wrong, because why? Because he was separated from the object. He thought, what if there's a demon of doubt controlling his mind to make it look that way? And he says, I'm stepping back. And then he discovered the I am in his meditations. He says, who am I? I don't know, because he dropped all of these mind and body, space and time and color, figure, texture, motion, all of these building blocks. And he stepped back and said, I am, but who am I? I don't know. Let me find out.
You mentioned meditation. You said he stepped back in meditation. You called meditation, and there's many different modalities of it, the profound technology to access the deep field.
That's right.
We need that.
Descartes was a
method of doing that, of tapping in, of putting your straw in the well and drinking of that elixir. We need that. And do you find, though, that how culture has changed, the questioning, the looking at everything, this emerging new story of who we are, has been a direct result of the fact that East has met West culturally for the last several decades? We have partook of the various means of meditation. We have altered states of consciousness are now accepted, acknowledged, pursued.
Right.
Do you find the shift in your 50 years of looking at this question? Do you see that we're getting closer?
Great question. And I think that yes and no. If East meets West here, right? And I was part of the East-West Society of Comparative Philosophy. Well, if East-West meets here without facing the code issue, you can meditate here too. You can have all the states of consciousness. What's a state? It's a static. It's a state of consciousness. Here, it's beyond a state of consciousness. It's a flow of consciousness. So East meets West here didn't work out very well, because my first published paper was, how can East meet West in their different worlds unless we have a common ground? And so meditation is not something the ego does, here, or you can't do yoga here. My son teaches yoga. He may be with us here. He teaches the yoga of yoga in Sedona. What's that? Well, yoga is not about ego-based yoga. It's letting go of the space, the cultural space that blocks us from access to Om. So meditation is the journey from egotation to source station, right? To getting the code of Om, getting the code of Buddha, getting the Zen. Zen is here. So you can meditate here. You can have altered states of consciousness. You can change your paradigm, change your world, change your story. You can have kind of conversions, but not inversion. Which means what? We're putting this first. And the great wisdom teaches to know, honor logos is first. How do you do that? By not privileging our derivative code and opening up into the space of this is first. Then you enter the cross. That's meditation. Meditation is a pathway from going from an ego-based, monocentric to deep dialogue flow in the zone. And that is the ultimate altered state.
I want to open this up to comments and questions, and I'm going to start by reading Jason Kunin. He wrote in the chat, if I were to encapsulate Dr. Gangadean's talk so far, it would be his expression, quote, we are as we are mind. At the heart of global wisdom as expressed by teachers across the planet is the insight that our world is shaped and created by how we use our mind. We have never been taught to pay attention to this phenomenon of consciousness. I agree. It is taken for granted and becomes molded by the multiplicity of narratives, worldviews, and influences that surround us. Yet, Dr. Gangadean asks us to turn inward and ask if our mindware is malware.
Yeah.
That is, could the way that we have been conducting our minds be contributing to the suffering individually and collectively that we witness in the world? He goes on to say, our wisdom teachers, speaking in different languages and at different times, converge on the realization that we have been stuck in a technology of mind that operates by objectifying reality and takes itself to be the standard to which all else is compared and evaluated. Privileging one's own lens prevents engaging with others in any genuine dialogue, for their worldview is supposed to be false or unfeasible. As Gangadean points out, such a way of thinking is antithetical to flourishing relationships with ourselves, others, even the environment, indeed. To experience reality from a lens where everything we encounter is treated as an object, as an I-it relationship, prevents a deeper, more authentic encounter with reality and everything in it. Just what you've been saying. Yes.
I know Jason has studied with me. He's teaching at St. Andrew's School. He's teaching global philosophy. And that comment was very astute and right on. We do know each other. We've been having dialogue. Hi, Jason.
Jason, come on screen if you'd like. I also want to talk to Brian's next, and many others are raising their hand. So Jason, hello.
Hi there. Jason Kunin, teacher at St. Andrew's School in Middletown, Delaware. I teach philosophy and religious studies. I studied with Professor Gangadean at Haverford College, his Buddhist philosophy, Zen philosophy. I was a teaching assistant for him, and we've been in dialogue for many years. So pleasure to be here. I didn't have a question. I just thought I'd offer a somewhat helpful summary since I presented the single double bracket presentation in my classes as well. There was recently an article in our school newspaper of, how it's sort of become a tradition for our sophomore classes to encounter this. So,
how did the students take to this? Both of you, how are you students? Are they so delighted with this? Are they using? Yeah. What's the response?
Jason, you want to speak first, then I'll speak.
Sure. So I work with high school students, and I find that it's a bit of a culture shock for them. I think they're they walk away with a sort of an positive existential shock because they're really in the middle of forming their ego identity, and then suddenly they're presented with this presentation that causes them to really question the way they're even using their thought and using their mind. And so they're confused, but I hear over and over and over again from students, there's something really important here. Yeah. And students who continue to study with me then begin to, they begin to get it, and they begin to learn the lingo and just a few months ago, I brought one of my classes that I call the Awakened Mind to Haverford so we could have a Q&A with Ashok as well. And as sort of a practice session, I gave them the instructions to do this presentation on their own. Imagine they were presenting it to the sophomore classes, the juniors and seniors.
Nice assignment.
They had a chance to practice that.
I would think they would go, oh, take the lid off. And now I am free to really explore on this deep level.
This is what I find at Haverford at Haverford now 55 years. There students, a certain subset of students are passionate about this. I have a certain reputation for teaching this. Many of the athletes come to my class to be in the zone. They want to get the literacy from being, not just as an athlete when they're at peak performance at the highest and best, but to do that for their lives. And so my laboratories, I call them laboratories, whether it's global ethics or global wisdom. I'm now doing global logic and global Zen, global again meaning in this space. As the students begin to learn the literacy of the code education, they love it. They're hungry for it. They see that this is for their whole lives. And they see how it relates to the culture at large. They see what's going on, for example, in the American scene and the wide-ranging pathologies, personal and cultural, and they begin to see that the great wisdom teachers are giving us diagnostic tools to understand the source of these pathologies. The common source traces to the malware of the mind. This is astounding. Because when you look and say there's suicidal issues, there's skepticism and nihilism, there's gun situations, there's a breakdown of January 6th on the Capitol. What's going on? The culture wars, the alternative truths, there's alternative, and the ideologies are broken. We have to save the soul of the nation. They see the difference between a culture here and a culture here. Especially in the Quaker setting, where the Quakers saw that the crisis within. And the honor code is to honor that, right? Honor each other. So there's a single bracket honor code, which is objectifying, but this is the place not of honoring the other, but objectifying. And it's a kind of violence. So to go into the nonviolent openness to one another, into the sacred space that Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Moses, Allah, and all our great teachers are calling us to this space. They get it and say, there's a very strong feeling in my classes. Whatever the lab is, the students are hungry for it. The characteristic to say this is life transforming.
I would say that culture shock you mentioned, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you realize your parents are not perfect and you forgive them. And then you move on and you grow in that. To realize our culture is not perfect. This is not the only way we have to be. It's the way it is, but it's not the only way to be. Yeah. And we can forgive and move to move the dial, right? And dialogue is just one of many means to do that. You mentioned another. You're going to say something. Oh no, great. I'll finish it. You mentioned Andy Newberg being another one of your students. We've had interviews with Andy Newberg celebrating his, here's the God gene, right? Here, this is just, we are connected to that all. In our cognitive development, in our neurology. We're connected to source. Do you want to speak to that as well?
Well, yes, Andrew Newberg studied with me back in the 80s, and he was deeply moved by getting this technology, and he went into medical school and brain imaging, and he's now the head of integral medicine in Jefferson in downtown Philadelphia, and his publications are really, he's doing brain images, seeing that when you look at the brain patterns of meditators, it lights up in a very different blood flow with people who do not. So just at that physiological level. But the point is that in the dominant scientific paradigm, to the extent that it says, look, the mind is really ultimately the brain. It's reducing consciousness to matter. And Andrew saw that as much as he's studying brain imaging and he's in integral medicine, he says we can't do that. There's something about God. There's something about God that can't be discovered. There's something about consciousness and cognition and awakening that all our great teachers are saying. When Plato was saying that mathematics, the path to wisdom, is the path to logos, out of the dominant culture that objectifies what we see and touch and feel.
And there's a seed in our physiology and access.
Into rational space. So Andrew Newberg is writing back, why God won't go away. That's one of his best-selling books. Why God called us. Another
We're
one,
hardwired for it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
we had an event at
We have this
Haverford College.
quest hardwired within us.
Well,
We
this
must
is,
ask.
Right,
in this
yeah, and
discussion is so critical. I mean, it's the foundation of why would this not be taught at every level of education, high school,
Yeah.
university level, or whatever, because it's kind of like determines where we go as a society, where we go as a civilization, how humankind can direct itself. We need to have that knowledge. We need to have that understanding of
We
this.
need to activate what
this
you already
pathway.
have, the technology within.
And we live in a world of
Yeah.
mass distractions, of weapons of mass distraction, and we're so busy with everything, and more so every single day. Even the task that we undertake with this program, there's so much technology pulling us away from just that meditative time of connectedness. So
You really have to maintain inner office hours, we call it.
It
It's
takes
a
both-
discipline.
It takes a discipline.
I have an
Yeah.
appointment with self for my inner
Yeah,
office
yeah, yeah.
hours.
So-
That's how we put it. Yeah.
So I'm a proponent of your teaching to be available at every university. I think that'd be
well,
fantastic.
students do say that they have to begin to get it more. And several students take more than one because they're hungry for this technology. It applies to all of their subjects, whether they're going to medical school or they're in law, whatever, economics. They see the difference between egonomics and logonomics, right? Between physics here and the unified field here, where consciousness is part of the physics.
And
Right.
you're really adding the next chapter to this
so they begin-
age-old quest.
Yeah.
They begin to see the
language.
power of this technology, and then they say, when they see the state of a culture as traceable to the pathologies of fragmentation, and that they see their futures turn upon bringing this deep dialogue intelligence to the public, a new normal. And so they say, Professor Gangadean, we're working with you, as Jason did here, but other people are not going to get this. Everyone needs to get this code education. They often say, when we have small group conversations, how this is going to happen? They see, in other words, what you just said, Paul, this education is vital for our survival.
Yeah.
Wisdom is
When
important.
is this going to become part of the standard curriculum?
That's right.
We
That's
add
right.
Brian to the conversation. Stay there, Jason.
Okay.
Let's add Brian.
Okay, Jason, you're still on. Here we go.
Yeah. Hey, Brian.
I was just adding, Jason, I love the way you summarized today's presentation and your experience with Dr. Gangadean as well. I wanted to just bring out, there are many efforts to approach this understanding that you're describing, Dr. Gangadean, of the logosphere. And one more recent effort is something I've been sharing with my colleague, Viola Olson, in a course that we're leading called Feeling Our Way Towards the Noosphere. And it's using the concepts of Teilhard de Chardin, Vladimir Vernadsky, and others, Brian Swim particularly, to find a way of expressing the emergence of a global planetary mind. But what I love so much is, and I'm so eager when your Greatest Story Never Told series comes out, because I think you're going to be giving us a much broader context than what I experienced with the noosphere, right? But I just wanted to have you maybe speak a bit to some of the similarities and some of the differences. These terms are all new to us. Like logosphere is really a great way of describing, but we haven't really had a chance to embody it and feel it. Noosphere is still relatively new and exciting, but limited. So from your experience, what do you see as the advantages of moving in? You've already expressed the advantages of moving into the logosphere, but how does an understanding of the noosphere either help or hinder us towards that effort?
Great question there, Brian. And imagine that you don't have the codes, right? We don't have the codes, because when I work with a group of distinguished people, in a culture called evolutionary leaders. I was part of the founding of that, evolutionary leaders, and the kind of thought of Brian Swim, and visions like Teilhard de Chardin and the noosphere. What is a noosphere? Nous is mind. The noosphere is a word. But if you don't have the codes, what we're going to do, we're going to articulate it in our dominant Google space. This is my main point. Whatever the wisdom is, you can have great best-selling book, The Power of Now. Well, what is now? Well, now is here. It's not the past, it's not the future, it's now. But no, when you go into the double bracket now, that's the power of now. So the pouring wisdom into the code conflated cultural space, the media, the public market space, where you don't even have code awareness, those words swallowed up by the dominant narrative, people, the public, draws it into our informationized Google space. So words like nous, or even like rational space, or Plato's forms, or the logos, or Christ, this is very important. If we don't see that Christ, if Christ is the voice of logos speaking in the double bracket voice to us, and the whole question of becoming a Christian is to let go of the separation space of the sin cut that cuts us off from connection into the Christ, then we're in question, am I really Christian? Buddha said you can't be Buddha here, you have to be Buddha here. How many millions of Buddhists are there? How many people are practicing yoga here? How many people are meditating here and trying to do activism here? Whereas the great teacher said, until you face the code issue, you're not medically going to get to the source of the pathology. So my response to your point, Brian, is that to continue to pour wisdom into the conflated code chaos where people are going to download it to a privileged view is blocking us from understanding the noosphere.
I see.
The Christ sphere, the Om sphere, the Yahweh sphere, the Allah sphere. It's huge. So if the Muslim means, Islam means surrender to Allah, what do you surrender? You're surrendering, you're putting your narrative and code first, which is a sin code. It's cutting us off systemically from access to.
That's what I mean by the culture taking over.
That's exactly right, Laura. That's right. So these words, I mean, as I teach, I try to bring in the code issue and place the noosphere here, right? To place the voice of the Gospels here. When John is writing the Gospel, you read the Gospel here, the good news gets cut off. The good news, the great news, is Christ is a liberation from being cut off, the path to Christ, right? So this is the real Quaker space, if you really want to use that term. So all of our words are compromised in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I think one result of that is that we tend to think that the issue is changing the contents of our consciousness. Oh, if I start reading these books, if I start meditating, if I start playing music, or if I start doing yoga and all of these things, but all of those things can be done in that same ego space, right? That Ashok's now pointing out, in the single bracket space. And it's not being used to change the very mental software, the very code or matrix is sometimes that you is the word you use, that we're even using to process our experience. So all those stories get downloaded. You'd say the power of now, or you'd say all of these sorts of, helpful, seemingly helpful, pithy statements. But what happens is that so long as we're using a certain code, we're going to mistake the map, the territory. We're going to get caught up in, thinking that, oh, change my narrative, change my story, change my life, but you're still using the same software of how you're running your experience. And
Right.
I think, at least in my encounter, Jiddu Krishnamurti was someone who I've encountered a lot, and he pointed this out a lot. Is he kept doing all of these talks and seminars, and the same people kept going over and over again. It's like you're repeating my words, but you're not changing anything about yourselves.
Yeah.
And
where does change happen? Where does that
shift in
transformation?
That shift. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And Krishnamurti, infamous for saying, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's no measure. We get adjusted because we don't know. We don't know that we're lodged and situated within mindware that's shaping our lives, that we are as we mind. We don't know that truth, that scientific observation of wisdom. If we're minding here, we're going to get these results. If we're minding here, we're going to have a different human space.
Yeah.
And every word here,
individually, or can we do this collectively?
Well, that's an education, right? So I love your Institute of Education and conversations for transformation. You can transform here, but transform is a change of form from this form, which is deformed, to well-formed. In the Logos is infinite form. Buddha is form. Christ is form. Moses is form. The laws of God, right here. So the question, literally, how do we get the wisdom, the collective wisdom? My passion in my life is to bring out the unum axiom, the unified axiom. How? To see that everyone is borrowing the unum here from here. And without the unum, which is the Latin word for the infinite unifying force, If you obliterate that, if you take this out, then you're in trouble because you can't maintain the sense of I, continuing time and space. How do you connect the dots? You can't connect the dots without the glue of Unum.
One thing that with Brian and Paul and I in this little global consciousness committee within our institute, we're looking at is so many small organizations bubbling up and declaring we are on Team Planet, we are on Team Global Humanity, we're on Team Life, we're on Team Spirit, as we do, and saying, can we look at things from not just the human-centered perspective, but can we look at all of life? Can we agree that all of life is sacred? Can we adapt that in our thinking? And it's exciting to see how many organizations now are willingly entering into that space and say, we're all stakeholders in this game. And what is it going to take? Is it going to be the climate crisis putting us on the brink? Is it going to be annihilation? We're dismissing so many species now, right? We're going extinct. It will eventually be our turn, and then that's when we're going to finally change. Or looking at if you want to eat a healthy diet, it's hard in this society. But now we're seeing that the earth can no longer support growing all the beef that we do. Right. At some point, it's just our lifestyle is not going to be possible for every person on that. We're going to have to change.
And the transformation,
the writing's on the wall. When do we do it?
I was going to say the transformation cannot happen just on the intellect alone. There's tons of intellectual discussions, but what you're pointing out in this conversation is that transformation has to come in a combination from within. There has to be some movement in a love. You use consciousness or whatever, but that
we each need our dark night of the soul to really face this pathology, right?
Right. I mean, that's what the foundation of this, and this is what Dr. Goodman, our founder, was talking about, is that we can go round and round and round talking about ideal society, but if we don't have some shared mission from the level of experience, on the level of an internal awakening, then that transformation is not going to happen. If we don't have.
All right, I'd like to comment on this. This is a very serious issue. And Laura Lee, what I noticed in the culture, and I was pulled into many different circles of activism and so forth. Right. And again, every word that we use in our culture is ambiguous between here and here.
Right.
So you could say, so we're all one, right? We're one nation. We can misuse one in this place. Unity here is not the Unum unity here, right? So God, the God word here is not God here. God is a foundation here. So we can speak all of these words in what's called a new age kind of attitude. We're all together, we're all one, we share one world, we're one with nature, we're one with species. You can say that, but if you're doing it again without understanding that to really say that here and to therefore to be it, right? To be it, because here you're being, it's ontology. Ontology is science of being.
To operate from is what you're saying.
It's a science of being, and this being is somehow fragmented and broken. So if that's the vocabulary you're using, and you're not aware that when you say we're all one, we're one nation. America is not hearing that, it seems. One nation under Logos, indivisible. We're not that. We think we're one nation. We want a more perfect union. Right? You can't get a more perfect union in the space of technology of disunion.
Right.
We've got to face the truth. My response, Laura Lee, is that all of these in our new age marketplace, are we code sensitive and realize that when we use those words, there's a deeper resonance to really be in the unified field of nature, to be one people, to be in the I thou. We can't use I it to be I thou. So that's my concern.
I see.
My concern is that for me, there's many ways of knocking on the door of that inner doorway to find that space, but that door has to be opened and grace has to allow us in. I mean, there's some engagement with the all, right? We don't find that path alone. We open the door, we knock on the door, it's opened, we enter. We are engaging with something larger than ourselves. We need that participation.
So what you're just saying here again, the double language, right? Yeah. We knock at that door and it opens in grace, right? This is grace.
That's grace.
The wisdom teachers knew that you can't barge into enlightenment. You have to do
You
some deep
negotiate your
minding
way through.
to open the portal. So this is the portal to presence. The portal here is blocked. So how do you open that door and have the crossing of all our great wisdom teachers to enter into the I thou sacred space, from desecrated, broken space into integral space? What is the portal? The code is vital in seeing this code is blocking us. And the portal, the double bracket portal that Jesus, the Buddha, the Mother, the teaching is that space. So what you're saying is absolutely right, Laura, but that's how I would word it.
Thank you both for being
Thank
a part of the
you.
discussion.
Thank you.
And-
Great
Thank you.
discussion.
And so I
I
didn't
want
mean
to
to,
bring Rex on. Rex has a very good comment, but before we do, I want to say that, you know, what I find is that you don't get through that door without a sense of gratitude and awe and wonder and humbleness and the willingness to let go of that which is blocking the way for you.
Absolutely right.
But
Absolutely
it
right.
takes something that you have to give and show up. You
It's
have-
existential humility, not humiliation, but humility. All the great teachers said to create the crossing, you got to get Arjuna, you got to get humble. He drops his weapon and says, teach me, Krishna, right? You've got to really realize that the crossing is so profound that when you're privileging your own experience and worldview and lens and so forth, and that's being called into question.
There's some surrendering to do.
That's the word surrender. You got it.
yeah.
That's 1776. We've got to detach, not from the British, but from the brutish, right? That's what they're calling it. Detachment, separation from whatever is compromising our dignity and independence as free beings.
Mm.
And then there's a responsibility to take up that space. It requires of you your best self.
Absolutely. You don't just barge into sacred space. You've got to really take your shoes off, right? Before you go into holy ground.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Laura, you're speaking very well.
She does.
And here's Rex that says, and Rex, come on, open your mic if you'd like to add to this, but I'll read from the chat. If we ask ourselves, who am I and where do I fit in this world? We will never find an answer because we create the world we live in. We are not a separate entity. So when you surrender your code, you also surrender your identity. And then how do you sense yourself? Is that a conundrum for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm certainly not studied this as an esoteric academic level, but I've certainly lived with all of the different traditions and understood them. And I, for a while, I offered a program in a business school on managing complexity and uncertainty. And the thing about it is that I never introduced myself. Somebody else did that because I didn't want to. As you know, what do you say? But basically, what I did was I threw them into, there were no notes, there was no answer to it. They were thrown into a situation where they had to plan and execute a day's sail on a 70-foot ocean racing yacht. There were 8 of them, and there were only 4 roles that during the period they were on the yacht, they had to adopt. And there were professional crews there, and for the vast majority of people, they'd never sailed before. Some of them, we had a lot of groups from China, had never seen the sea before. So we threw them into something, and all that we did is videoed how they did it. So I didn't tell them how to manage. I didn't talk about complexity and uncertainty. I just threw them into it. And then at the end of it, we looked at the following day, they just in teams looked at the videos and they could see for themselves how they handled complexity and uncertainty. And also they were correcting themselves. I never spoke or said anything that this was good or bad. But the interesting thing at the end of it was when they said, when I said, look, one of the things that you are unaware of is in inviting you to do this, I'm connecting you with the universe as well, because the planets, the solar system has an impact on the weather, the tides, the ocean, the water, all this other stuff. So you've got where you sit in the universe is impacting what happens that day. And the earth itself is impacting everything around you. And you can't be dogmatic about, well, we'll do this and hope it works.
Right.
And to some degree, this, for me, was about not imposing anything on them, but offering them the experience of doing it. What was fascinating, though, is in the 23 years I was running it, we had thousands of people through it. But the people that were most amazed were the professional crews, because everything I was asking them to do, they told me was impossible. Until at the end of the day, they just said, we don't believe this has happened, but it clearly has, and we don't know how you do it. So I think, within all of this, to answer the bigger question, it's when you, in fact, withdraw yourself and you hold the space for others to share it, something happens. What I've found in all that time, though, is probably 5% of the people who went through the program really got it. And you could spot them a mile off because they were transformed by the experience, but they couldn't tell you what had happened, but they just knew that they just sensed everything differently.
So much of this happens without any words that are adequate to the task to describe it. So that's kind of know when you've entered that space. It's beyond words, written and spoken.
I have to say the interesting thing is I'm at the moment rereading Castaneda's books and Thomas, who wrote after him. And I have to say, from reading those books, especially the active side of infinity, you can pick up all the clues that the Toltec tradition suggested, which was that you lose yourself. You actually have to surrender to death. And then what emerges gives you a completely different perspective on the world. And I think, by and large, this is underlying what has been spoken about so far.
Excellent, Rex. May I respond? Thank you so much, Rex. I'd like to have more conversation with you. I love what you did. That comes out in my experiments too. I call my classes laboratories. And we want to step out of the artificial academic, a more rigid, reified space of thinking to open space. When you open deep dialogue space, right, it's scary. And as a coach, I have to hold that space for dialogue and ask everyone in the room to hold space for dilating the space for dialogue. And I invite the students to find their own voices, to write not academic papers, but to explore in new ways. Your experiment is great. But what looks like chaos and complexity here has chaotic flow in the deeper zone. So when an athlete is learning how do I manage the literacy and intelligence of stepping up to the plate, not a plate here with a bat here, but as a hitter here in the zone, to meet the ball in spontaneity and openness and creativity. That's the essence of being a deep dialogue sapient. It's exactly right.
I think one of the things that fascinated me is I offer occasionally a single day to explore what do we mean by unconditional love. And in each case, I speak for no longer than 10 minutes through the entire day, because I just ask them to form groups of 3 and find an understanding. And normally something will arise during the course of that where I have to ask them to go and just meditate. And it's always the same thing though. When I ask them where they're struggling, they always point to their heads. And I ask them, as they're in a meditative state, to just slowly bring their finger down their body. And they all burst into tears when it gets to the heart. And then I stop it and it just carries on. I don't have to do anything more.
Right.
And at the end of the day, they've just discovered it for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, I really love the way you're speaking, because Valentine's here, love here. This is too crowded already. But this is a great one, because in this space, love and the heart is not the same as love in the intimate space.
Absolutely.
If you should, this is the space of love, is a space of where you meet your other, you meet your lover in the open space. That's intimacy of I and thou, not I and it. So the students know, if you get a Valentine's card, honey, you're the greatest thing in my life. That's not love. You're looking for love. You can't find love in all the wrong places. You've got to enter into the open-hearted space of the heart mind, as you say, right? And then meet the other. This is a healthy human being. This is a person. When we meet each other as persons, not as objects. If you're looking for love here, you're not going to find. That's the frustration of the love life, right? And the meeting place of intimacy. How do you meet your child as a parent and not objectify the child and raise him into get on the yellow bus and go to school and do no, but hold the space in the home base to have sacred space to raise a sacred human being. How do we do that?
Yeah, I find.
My little dog,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to say, my little dog is the best expression of unconditional love.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what happens, he's always there. He licks, and so when I'm looking for unconditional love, the pooch does it for me.
And it's not just dogs to humans. There's so many
That's animals.
friendships
All
across
animals.
species.
Yeah.
So if
That's
they're
right.
capable of it, why aren't we better at that? I want to say, Ashok, that in my observation, it's not that all roads lead to Rome, but all roads lead to source. I trust that each of us will get there in the end, and that life's challenges are all about pushing us forward, because that's the only answer. I want to say that you've talked about the spiritual traditions and the religions, but one that I find very profound, though I have not been on that road myself, that was not my road, thankfully, was the road of recovery. And we had recent conversations with Frank Ferrante, who really bared his soul to talk about his own road from hell and back to find redemption, and the wisdom that he had to find just to survive after a couple of suicide attempts that he described, and just really doing anything to numb out and realizing that is not the path. I really need to find myself. That's the only way forward. And it was a very moving story to find, just as we're describing here, that when all falls away, all the nonsense falls away, what is left is just love and compassion and showing up. That's the path. And so you don't even need a quote religion. Life's journey can propel you if you let it nudge you forward, if it's your only hope and salvation. And I find when the road gets rocky on the hero journey, that it's a well-trod path from heroes before us. And that golden brass ring to find is just facing that dark night of the soul and just saying there's nothing left but just love and compassion, right? When my mother was dying on her deathbed, the month that we had with her, everything else fell away. All that was left was just love. It's there. It's there. So
I find it very interesting.
Go ahead.
So with Castaneda, it's very interesting. The whole of the time that Castaneda's with Don Juan, he's stripping away his identity. He's inviting him to do this. So in the end, it's when he completely has lost his identity, only then does he understand. But it took, when you then think Don Juan was the example of that, because he was so, in a sense, he was so ephemeral most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's one thing, somebody in desperation wanting to end their life, unfortunately it will end the life, and there's no gain in that. But if you have if you've surrendered your identity, there's everything to gain.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that, because again, and Laura, when you say all roads lead to the source, right?
Eventually, it might be a very circuitous route I find in my own life, but eventually, yeah.
Yes. So when you say surrender your identity, right? The identity is the identity code that we're living with, and to surrender is not just to how do you step back from the ego identity? You've got to see the code that's giving us the ID life, the life of separate pieces. So conditional love here is conditioned by the lens that you see the other. And your lover is seen through your lens. But when you meet in a lover's space, why? Because the infinite space, when you say God is love, Logos is love, why? Because the unifying force of the harmonics of the field of the logosphere is love. It's dharma, it's ethics, it's ideal. So the unconditional love, double bracket love, is courageous to leave your ID and dare to step into the open I am. To step back from the ID into the I am is scary.
And to the extent that the Castaneda, anyone can go into recovery, right? You can say, you can go to an AA meeting here and say, I was alcoholic, I did the program, and I believe in a higher power, and it helped me to stop and break my addiction. But there's a deeper addiction. It's an addiction. It's a pandemic to be addicted to a mind operating process that's shaping our whole lives and world.
Yeah, our society makes it very hard to find our way, doesn't it?
No,
I'd like to add
let
something,
me please,
if I could. It's, for a while.
Yeah, go ahead. I want
Sorry.
Rex, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. For a while, I ran a large hospital group, and it was a disaster area. When I took it over, there were 5 organizations to mold into one. After 2 years, we were outperforming everybody else. Everything was just completely the opposite way. And the government sent in a team of auditors to find out how we were doing this, or whether our statistics were true. And at the end of 6 weeks, with 6 of the auditors, they came to me and they said, everything you said is true. Yeah, so everything you've claimed, we can validate. However, there is one thing that we cannot put in our report, we all agree. And that was that if we were to blindfold any one of the team and put them in a building, they could tell whether I had, or they were part of my organization or not. Because what shocked me then is they said, because everywhere that you have a control of, there's a tangible sense of joy and happiness, and we feed it.
That's right.
And
Right.
so the only thing I would say about that, though, is that, and I think it's actually indicative of what happens predominantly in the West, the way I handle power is I give it away. Because the role itself, there's enough power, but by accepting accountability for everybody's actions, but giving away the power to control it, I'm inviting them all the time to tell me how they would solve it, which means I learn from them, and occasionally they learn from me. But I think that's the only thing that I could put it down to, whereas all of the other directors or the chief execs I know told people what to do, and they basically enjoyed the power.
I would agree
Thank
with
you,
you
Rex.
about the joy and creativity and happiness. The founder of our institute, Dr. Felicia Goodman, would say we're all ecstasy deprived, but when you tap into that space, you find you flourishing. Compassion and generosity and unconditional love and feeling at one with the universe and joy. That she felt was our natural state. If we can remain there, I want to say thank you so much, Rex, for
Thanks,
your
Rex.
contributions.
Yeah.
We have Jean, but as you put Jean on, I want to ask, I do have a problem with the term logos. For me, it's so associated with logic, and that's just such a human construct.
Is it John speaking? Is that John speaking?
Where can the mysteries still be the mysteries that are far greater than just our little species?
Yeah.
How does the language integrate the fact that there's far more to this underlayment of reality than just the human mind of it?
Yeah.
So.
That's a question from comment from John.
No, that's a question from me.
That's Laura's comment.
That's
we'll go to
mine.
John next.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Comment
yes.
that I've been mulling over for some time.
That's the whole point, because logos here may be anthropocentric and our logos, but logos as the foundation of reality, the infinite is not anthropocentric. That's the whole point. It's not dominated and privileged by our stories and our human. When you dare to enter into the logosphere, into the deep infinite field, nature, every moment, every blade of grass, every drop of water, every point here is sacred. It's not a human dominated point anymore. It's every point you realize, and that the ritual of seeing and living in your culture here. If you try to drink some water here, sacred water, how do you do that? Well, who can't do it? You've got to open up, as Rex was suggesting, right? To have.
You're saying it's one of the doorways.
When you say doorways, from your earlier remark, Laura, is that infinite force is infinitely operative at every moment of life, right? We're always living under, I call it LUI, we're living under the influence of the Logos call. It's the infinite force. You can never step outside of it. So when you say we're being called to source, you're absolutely right. Every human, whatever your story, Even you could be a nihilist, you could be a denialist, you could be negative, you could say there is no logos, but you couldn't, when you realize you couldn't do that without logos, if you begin to see that, then you're recognizing the call of the infinite to come home, right, to the source. I'm just honoring the point.
I just want to say the one aspect of Brian Swim and Teilhard and all those folks with the noosphere, the one piece that I really love is this new story that it's the 14.7 billion years of evolution, this womb of creation that the cosmos is, that we are a product of, that has come together to create us in this moment in time. And what are we going to do with it? And that would be our true identity, that we are part of this larger whole. And it took all of these miracles to come together for life to exist, for the universe to exist, for Earth to come together to support this thin little biosphere, for us to be here, and that we can reflect back on it. That is such a beautiful story.
It is a beautiful story, but again,
so many people.
They have two different rings, this story, because and I have dialogue with that story from stardust to us.
Yes.
How many billions of years? That particular narrative is blown away by our Buddhas and Krishnas. In the beginning is Christ. In the beginning is love. What's the beginning? In the beginning is God, right? It's an infinite force and source of the universe story. The Logos story is a universe story. The universe story, rightly understood, not as a story here, not as a narrative. Remember, our narratives are all proceeding in a narrative space that we know. But the deeper narrative of the universe story, what I'm calling the greatest story never told, is until we realize that our stories, even a beautiful story like the universe, how do we go from stardust to us? How many billions of years? Ontologists know that that story doesn't capture the beginning that is timeless. The infinite cannot begin. It doesn't have occur. Yahweh doesn't, let there be light, didn't begin at a certain time. That's the mythology
it's the solid
here.
state of the universe that always was and always is.
That's right, exactly.
Thank you. John Berger is next.
Yeah, okay.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so anyway, I feel like I heard a really amazing documentary about M. Scott Momaday, who is probably knows an incredible writer who both appreciated Emily Dickinson, who was, some people say is a recluse, but what does it mean to be a recluse? She's a recluse from a culture that she probably feels like is inimical to her soul. But M. Scott Momaday, anyway, did, I think, his thesis on Dickinson, and at the same time, he was rejected by some people as being a Native American, and then he was rejected sometimes by his own people having become an academic. So he was a person who I have great admiration for, but he said in this documentary, he says, it says in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and he stopped there. In other words, he went on to say in the beginning was the Word that was with God, the Word was that, but why did he have to say that? You know, so what I think he was getting at there is that in the beginning was the Word. There can't be one word, obviously, because word means, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but the word logos oftentimes is translated as word. If you mean language, and I think Laura is sort of referring to this, if you mean language, that's different than words, because animals, for example, the cart you mentioned, the cart for some people is the poster child of alienation and fragmentation.
Well, let's stick with the original question, and let's have
yeah.
Ashok really talk about the word. I like the word Om. It's a vibration, right? It's just putting that energy out through.
Well, the word in Ashok, in Western, in sort of the Western tradition, logos is oftentimes paired with eros, and the word logos oftentimes doesn't, for some people, doesn't have any meaning unless it's paired with eros. And I feel like what you're talking about is something that sort of transcends this dichotomy, that the word logos is kind of a phrased term. And I wonder, like, I'd say one more thing. Eric Fromm, I feel like, is onto something back in the 60s when he said that over the last couple hundred years in the English language and maybe European languages, the use of verbs is on a decline and the use of nouns was on the increase. So I'm wondering if, like, for example, you mentioned Buddha and Jesus and Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is interesting, but Jesus didn't write anything down. Buddha didn't write anything down. And so what we know about what they said comes to the written form. And I wonder, when I hear the word logos, I often think about philosophy as knowledge and text. And I feel like to me, I feel this, when you're describing and pointing up to the upper box, the lower part of your diagrams are always filled in with so much stuff. You have to keep turning the page because there's no more room. It's all just like kind of cool, scribble, scrabble. But the top
Good
part, you're
illustration.
kind of keeping it open, which is kind of nice, keeping a little space up there. So I may have said too much stuff, but I feel like there's
No,
something about
described it nicely. Yeah.
the word as being written. It seems like information. So you mentioned Moses. To me, Moses is really different from Jesus because the 10 Commandments are written in stone, and obviously people have not even been able to follow the 10 Commandments.
All right. Let's let Ashok
and also
answer.
Blake. Yeah.
Let's let him answer.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
You put
Okay,
some good
thank you.
stuff on the table. Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. When I selected the word logos in this sense, I am often misunderstood right away by saying, oh, logos is too heady, it's too abstract, it's too, the word, you know, I'm doing an advanced seminar on global logic and language of the word. And words are, as we know it, are already derivative words in our download. But in the beginning is the word. When you go to the beginning, to the infinite, our great thinkers knew that whatever name we use, it's going to be, all names are going to be encoded there. It's going to be eros. It's going to be space. It's going to be time. It's going to be, why? Because it's the beginning of the word. It's not a word, a separate word or a separate language. It's a source of all possible words. It's the infinite word. If you say in the beginning is the logos, and the word was with God, the word was God. What does that mean? That's the infinite word of all words. That any words that we humans can have in our vast range of languages,
I like source.
and, you know, are tapping into the word power, the infinite word power, and that all words originate. That means what? Is there matter and body and energy? Yes, infinite. And so theology will see how much intelligence is on the ground floor? Infinite. Wow, that's omniscience, right? How much being? Infinite being. Whoa, that's huge, infinite being. When you begin to understand the calculus and the science of the infinite, it encodes all possibilities. There is no language or even internet, the code of the cyber code, that is not tapping somehow into the source of all codes. That's what we're talking about. When Plato saw the journey to wisdom is going to tap the logos, the source of the light of being, the light of the mind, right? And that's wisdom, and it's beyond truth and knowledge, as great as those are. And that's what wisdom is. That's huge. So when you tap the Om, it's the infinite symbol of all possible symbols. When you tap Shunyata, Buddha calls it Shunyata. I'm using the word logos to include all of those great first names, which once you see the logic of the infinite, how many names are there? Infinite names. Wow. That's the calculus of the infinite.
What do you most want your students to walk away with? What do you most want this next generation that you're teaching to do for the world? To take your contributions and amplify it into what effect? What are your hopes for the future?
Thank you for that. And this is really my whole passion of my life is what I say code education as the medicine of our global wisdom, the global scriptures, of the mystics, all of the great men and women of the ages who are first responders to the call of the first. There's something first across the planet, whatever name you use, it's got to be coming from the infinite source. And you don't have to call it, we can say infinite being, infinite love, infinite relationality, the unified field, whatever name you use, right? So once students begin to get code educated to say, oh my God, I must attend to mind my minding to realize that the world I have, the world that's appearing to me, the phenomena of my world, and even the multiple versions of it, because I could have multiple narratives of my world as a religious person, as a scientist, and so forth, right? To realize that I'm participating in the making of my world. And how I use my mind is all important in the world I get. So mind your minding and pay attention. And that the collective wisdom of the planet, over 2,500 years calling us out, is code up, make the shift, become a first person, become the first. So Socrates, leave the cave and come into the logos and know thyself.
what I hope my students will get from going through the laboratory with me to whatever it's logic, whether it's global ethics, whether it's global ontology, whatever Zen, whatever philosophy of language, that they will get code aware and to become minding your minding and saying, wow, look what's going on in my culture. Look what's going on my campus. Look how diversity is being misunderstood. Look at all of the pathologies of racism, sexism, homophobia, Holocaust, genocides, gun. All of them are traceable to the malpractice of the mind. The best shot I had in my life, I'd like my students to say, is I'm going to pay attention to how I mind and see if I can mind my life in the best version of myself. That's my hope.
Beautiful.
How do we take the world's traditions and cultures and languages and all? You want to maintain the integrity of that. And then how do we let down our arms and then find common ground? How do we start to behave as one family of man,
There has to be
one biosphere, one web of life? How do we do that? Where's the practicalities?
Well, that's exactly what, to me, code education is. The key to being able to go from monologue version of dialogue. You can talk dialogue, enter dialogue space and speak your truth into the space and still not be meeting in the deep dialogue space. How do you go? If I'm a Christian, if I'm a Buddhist, if I'm a scientist, if I'm pro-choice, if I'm pro-life, if I'm Big Bang, if I'm Genesis, I'm dialoguing and trying to find the common ground, right? The topic of this conversation is logos, the underlying unity, the common ground. And dialogue means dialogos, through the logos. Ironically, it's not means privilege your access, your lens. So when people become lens educated, I have a lens and I'm interpreting the other from my lens, and I need to dilate and step open to an open mind, as Rex was saying, into the open, sacred, deep space, right? The space of deep dialogue, right? Until we know that, we're going to continue to do our monologue addiction to this that cuts us off. So, Laura, I think that the thing, code education is a necessary moment in our evolutionary journey, and the greatest, the Brian Swim great story. Yes, conscious evolution. That term is used around by the circles that with the evolutionary leaders. Conscious evolution is now to step up and advance and mature.
I think it's going to take all that we have to bring to bear.
Yeah.
I think all these various techniques, of which yours is an important one. You are coming back next month on the 12th of March, and we're going to engage in your dilated dialogue. We're going to run this, if this is such an important key to get this into our mindset and adopt this. We've invited you to, I think Brian's going to represent polyspirituality. You have a colleague that you're bringing. You've got our whole community here. We'll be engaging in your dilated dialogue. Do you want to tell us a little bit, give us a highlight of what we can expect next month on the 12th?
I think there are moments in this conversation where, for example, Rex was sharing what he did. That was a great dialogue moment and great sharing. I'm hoping that, people will bring their wisdom and with an open outlook and open mind, with a sensitivity. Let's pay attention to the code issue and to how do we go from monologue, single bracket dialogue to deep dialogue. Because what you're suggesting rightly, Laura, is that we need as a culture to be educated and sensitized to the art of dialogue and becoming the first version of ourselves. I'm hoping that will happen in our dialogue.
Method to engage in conversation.
That's right.
And you'll be talking about your 7 principles of dialogue, right? We'll start with that.
Yes.
And then we're just going to see how that works.
That's right.
Nothing like the doing.
Exactly. It's the most practical thing ever.
And you'll bring your son,
My son is a brilliant philosopher, artist, singer, songwriter, singing and bringing his music from the source music, and yoga, right?
Yeah.
It'd be good to have him. He's a great colleague, so he'll join that conversation as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
This has been fabulous, and what an amazing and powerful way for us to try to push things forward, to push the conversation forward. I like the fact that you referred to this as conversation for transformation. We always say conversation for exploration, but I like that idea of transformation as well. That's something that's important, that we take the steps, each of us, to find our own way of transformation. in a unified way that allows for the individuality to be fully expressed. Whether someone is a Hindu or someone is a practicing Christian or whatever, that we're not taking away any individual system. We're just trying to strengthen and allow for the fulfillment of that particular path of enlightenment, that path of understanding and experience. So I think that's really makes this thing.
Well, and also we need to find our right relation with ourself, with our community, with our planet, with the larger source of everything, what you would call the logosphere. And so we have these many relationships in these many different spheres, nested spheres, you could say. And so we have to maintain I mean, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's all of the above. How do we truly bridge from our ego self? We've got an intellect, we've got an ego, we've got the equipment here to navigate this sphere, our everyday reality. We don't want to kill it. We want to grow it. We want to build the bridge to that larger identity, right? We're bridge building. We're crossing worlds. We're creating networks. We're creating the superhighway for us all.
That's it.
Right? So
yeah,
it's quite the journey. We're all on this collective hero's journey is the way I see it. We all have this common mission. So maybe it's even more powerful than any time in history. Maybe we have that potential.
To me, the real hero is one who is going to face the code issue. That's a portal. That's a scary crossing from the privileging of your own code to really daring to go into the open space where you become who you are. A Christian becomes Christian. The scientist becomes a scientist. The practitioner becomes deep. You realize your true, deeper first version of yourself. That's really right. Exactly.
To get down to the primal first principles is one way that you describe it, right? To get down to that just deepest layer, that point of origin, the alpha, the omega.
The word principle, the principle means what is first. Principe is first, and logos, the logosphere is first. So coming into the first, it's not a principle that's articulated as a Google principle, but coming to the principle is tapping the source itself. That's a principle.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I look so forward to next month getting into this even deeper in a new profound way of sharing. And just what a wonderful presentation.
And I told you you'd find a community that got you here because from all those who spoke here,
and all you brave souls that sat through these last 2 hours and taking you on this journey and maybe breaking some boundaries and opening yourself up to a new realizations and understandings and integration in your own life. I think it's fantastic. So I wanted to thank Ashok for his incredible presentation. And
I want to say thank you both for hosting this. You did very well. And congratulations.
Thank you, everyone that came and participated in Ashok. Thank you so much. We look so forward to the next presentation.
Thank you so much. It was
we'll talk in the meantime. Blessings to you all.
Thank you. I enjoyed this being with you. Thank you.